The night air in Austin hung heavy with anticipation. It was supposed to be just another sold-out show for George Strait at the Frank Irwin Center, but fate had different plans for everyone involved. The king of country music had no idea that, outside those doors, a man with nothing left to lose was about to change both their destinies forever. Ray Wilson clutched his battered five-string guitar, his weathered fingers tracing the scratches on its surface. Each mark told a story, much like the lines etched into his 42-year-old face. Once upon a time, he'd been somebody in the Austin music scene. Not famous, but respected enough to get steady gigs and make a decent living doing what he loved. That was before the bottle became his closest friend and worst enemy. Sitting on the sidewalk across from the venue entrance, Ray watched the parade of boots and fancy outfits filing into the arena. These people had paid hundreds of dollars to see George Strait, his musical hero since childhood. Ray had exactly $3.47 to his name, crumpled bills and loose change in his jacket pocket. "Might as well make myself heard," he muttered, positioning his fingers on the strings. The opening notes of Amarillo by Morning drifted into the evening air, his voice starting rough before finding its footing. A voice that carried years of heartache and regret, but somehow maintained an undeniable authenticity that no amount of formal training could create. "Hey folks, I'd love to take a quick moment to thank you for joining us for this incredible story. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please subscribe to our channel and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to us, and there's so much more to come. Now let's get back to Ray and see what happens next." Most of the concert-goers barely registered Ray's presence. Some quickened their pace, clutching their purses tighter as they passed. A few kinder souls tossed coins into his worn cowboy hat without making eye contact. Ray didn't mind. He'd long ago learned to play for himself more than anyone else. It was the only therapy he could afford. "Excuse me, sir, you can't solicit here." A security guard approached, his voice bored but firm. "Venue policy." Ray nodded, preparing to gather his meager belongings. It had been worth a shot. Then a booming voice cut through the evening chatter. "Is that Amarillo by Morning I hear? And you're butchering it completely." Ray looked up to see a well-dressed man in his 50s, wearing an expensive leather jacket and boots that probably cost more than Ray had made in the past year of street performances. Derek Chambers, a name that carried weight in the Austin music scene, a producer who'd worked with some respected regional acts. "Sorry if it offends you," Ray replied quietly, continuing to strum. Derek Chambers wasn't finished. He turned to his companions, fellow industry types who laughed on cue. "Listen up, folks. This is how you destroy a classic. Take notes on how not to sing." His voice carried deliberately, drawing attention from nearby concert-goers who paused to watch the uncomfortable scene unfold. Ray's fingers faltered on the strings, the familiar shame of public humiliation washing over him. 3 years on the streets had hardened him to many things, but the ridicule still cut deep, especially when it targeted the one thing he had left: his music. "Maybe you should move along, sir," the security guard said, now addressing Ray with more authority, eager to dissolve the developing scene. Ray nodded, gathering his things while keeping his eyes downcast. He'd returned to his usual spot under the Congress Avenue Bridge tonight. At least the bats didn't critique his singing. What no one noticed, least of all Ray, was the man who had stopped 20 feet away, coffee cup in hand, listening intently. Tommy Foley had been George Strait's tour manager for 15 years. He knew music, and more importantly, he knew authenticity when he heard it. Pulling out his phone, he began recording Ray's performance discreetly. Inside the venue, George Strait was in his dressing room, going through his pre-show ritual. At 67, the king of country still commanded stages with the same ease and charm that had made him a legend. He was reviewing the set list one last time when Tommy burst in, excitement evident on his usually composed face. "George, you need to hear something," Tommy said, holding up his phone. Straight raised an eyebrow, but gestured for Tommy to play whatever had him so animated. The tinny sound of Ray's raw, emotional rendition of Amarillo by Morning filled the room. George listened silently, his expression unreadable as always. "Where'd you find this?" he finally asked, handing the phone back. "Outside. Homeless guy with a busted guitar. Some producer type was giving him hell, but George, I haven't heard someone sing with that much soul in years." Straight nodded thoughtfully. "What's his name?" "No idea. Want me to find out?" George checked his watch. "Hour till showtime. Bring him to me." Tommy hurried out, hoping to catch Ray before he disappeared into the Austin night. He found him 3 blocks away, slowly making his way down the street, guitar case in hand. "Hey, guitar man!" Tommy called out, jogging to catch up. Ray turned, wariness evident in his posture. People who chased him down rarely brought good news. "Name's Tommy Foley. I work for George Strait," Tommy said, extending his hand. Ray looked at the outstretched hand suspiciously before shaking it. "Ray Wilson, what can I do for you, Mr. Foley?" "I heard you singing outside the venue. George would like to meet you." Ray laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Right, good one." Tommy pulled out his backstage credential. "Dead serious. He heard your recording and wants to talk before the show." Ray stared at the credential, then at Tommy's face, searching for the punchline. Finding none, he swallowed hard. "This some kind of joke? That producer send you to rub it in?" "No joke. Just grab your guitar and come with me. Worst case scenario, you get to meet George Strait and get out of the cold for a bit." Ray hesitated, only briefly before nodding. What did he have to lose? The backstage area was a blur of activity. Crew members with headsets, venue staff checking credentials, the distant sound of the opening act warming up the crowd. Ray felt painfully out of place in his worn jeans and frayed flannel shirt, acutely aware of the stares and wrinkled noses as Tommy led him through the corridors. "In here," Tommy said, knocking on a door marked with a simple star. "Come in," came the reply in that unmistakable voice. Ray's heart hammered against his ribs as Tommy opened the door, revealing George Strait sitting on a leather couch, guitar in lap, looking exactly as he did on album covers, except for a few more lines around the eyes. "Mr. Strait, this is Ray Wilson," Tommy introduced. George stood, setting his guitar aside, and extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Ray. I heard you singing my song out there?" Ray took the offered hand, struggling to find words. "I'm sorry if I butchered it, sir." "That producer wasn't wrong. I'm out of practice." George's expression remained neutral. "Mind playing something for me? Right here. Just us." Tommy handed Ray a pristine acoustic guitar from a nearby stand. Ray looked at it like it might bite him, then carefully took it, adjusting to the feel of 6 intact strings, a luxury he hadn't experienced in years. "Any requests?" Ray asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dealer's choice," George replied, sitting back down. Ray thought for a moment, then began playing The Chair, another Strait classic. The intro was shaky, his fingers remembering positions they hadn't found in years, but when he began to sing, the room seemed to still. The years of hard living had given his voice a texture that told stories between the lines of the lyrics. He sang with closed eyes, forgetting where he was, who was listening, losing himself in the music. When he finished, he opened his eyes to find George Strait watching him with an intensity that made Ray shift uncomfortably. "Why are you on the streets, Ray?" George asked directly. Ray ran a hand through his unkempt hair. The usual story. Drinking led to missed gigs. Missed gigs led to no money. No money led to no home. Lost my family, my daughter, everything. George nodded thoughtfully. "You still drink?" "Trying to quit. 3 weeks sober," Ray admitted. "Longest stretch. In years. The country legend stood and walked to a small refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water and handing it to Ray. "Tommy tells me someone was giving you a hard time out there." Ray shrugged. "Some producer, Derek Chambers, knows his stuff, though. I was probably hurting people's ears." George's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I got turned down by every label in Nashville when I started out. One producer told me I didn't have what it took, that I should find another line of work." He paused. Almost believed him too. Before Ray could respond, a production assistant knocked on the door. 15 minutes, Mr. Straight." George nodded. "Tommy, find Ray something to eat and a place to clean up, and make sure he has a seat for the show." Ray blinked in surprise. "Sir, I can't accept—" "You can and you will," George interrupted firmly. "And after the show, we'll talk more." As Tommy led a bewildered Ray out, George remained in his dressing room, thoughtfully picking up his phone and making a call. The concert was everything the ads had promised. George Strait delivering hit after hit with the effortless charm and vocal precision that had made him the king of country. Ray watched from a seat that probably cost more than a month's worth of meals, feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life. During the encore, George performed Amarillo by Morning, and Ray felt tears stinging his eyes. 3 years ago, he'd been playing in bars around Texas, making a decent living before the drinking took over. Now he was here, witnessing greatness, wondering what might have been. When the second encore finished, the lights came up slightly, signaling the end of the show. Fans began gathering their belongings, still buzzing from the performance. Then, unexpectedly, the lights dimmed again. George Strait walked back onto the stage, his expression serious. "Texas, you know I never do this," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the arena. "But today I felt we need to hear a different voice. There's a gentleman outside who has something to say with music, and I think you need to hear him as much as I needed to." Ray froze in his seat as George continued. "I'd like to invite Ray Wilson to join me on stage." The spotlight swung wildly, searching the audience until it found Ray. 15,000 people turned to look at the disheveled man who clearly didn't belong among them. Tommy appeared at Ray's side, gently urging him up. "It's your moment, man. Don't waste it." On shaky legs, Ray followed Tommy to the stage, every step feeling like a mile. The audience murmured, some with disgust at his appearance, others with curiosity. As he stepped into the spotlight, the contrast between his worn clothing and George's immaculate Western wear couldn't have been more stark. George Strait handed him the gorgeous Takamine guitar he'd played all night, an instrument worth thousands. "Show them what you showed me," he said quietly. With trembling hands, Ray took the guitar, its weight and perfection almost foreign after years of playing his damaged instrument. The silence in the arena was absolute, 15,000 people holding their breath, many wondering what George Strait was thinking by bringing this vagrant onto his pristine stage. Ray's fingers found the strings, and he began plucking the gentle intro to The Chair. His hands trembled visibly under the harsh stage lights. The first notes wavered, uncertain, and someone in the audience coughed loudly. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Ray closed his eyes, blocking everything out. He took a deep breath, and when he opened his mouth to sing, the transformation was instant. The uncertain notes gave way to a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights and broken dreams, raw, soulful, and hauntingly authentic. "Well, excuse me, but I think you've got my chair." The opening line silenced the whispers. By the second verse, the audience was leaning forward in their seats. His voice wasn't polished like Strait's, but it possessed something that training couldn't provide, the unmistakable texture of a life lived hard, of mistakes made and prices paid. It was the voice of a man who understood the lyrics beyond their melody, who had lived every emotion the song conveyed. Halfway through, George Strait stepped forward, adding his own iconic voice to create an unexpected duet. The contrast between Strait's perfect pitch and Ray's emotional rasp created something magical, like whiskey meeting honey. Their voices intertwined, telling the story of chance encounters and second opportunities with new meaning. When the final notes faded, the arena remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then came an explosion of applause that nearly knocked Ray back a step. 15,000 people rose to their feet, their ovation rolling toward the stage like a tidal wave of sound. Many were wiping tears from their eyes, caught off guard by the emotional impact of what they'd just witnessed. George placed a steadying hand on Ray's shoulder as the applause continued for nearly 5 minutes. Ray stood frozen, overwhelmed by the response, his eyes scanning the crowd in disbelief. When the cheering finally began to subside, George stepped to the microphone. "Folks, that right there is what real country music is about. Telling the truth even when it hurts." He turned to Ray. "Thank you for sharing your truth with us tonight." Ray nodded, too choked with emotion to speak. He tried to hand the guitar back, but George shook his head. "Keep it for now," George said quietly. "Before turning back to the audience, I'd like to tell you a story that not many people know." The arena fell silent again as George continued. "Back in 1979, I was nobody, just another guy with a guitar trying to make it in Nashville. I must have been turned down by every record label in town." His voice took on a reflective quality. "One producer told me to my face that I didn't have what it took, that I should go back to Texas and find a real job." The audience murmured in disbelief that anyone could have rejected George Strait. "I almost believed him," George continued, "almost packed it in and quit. Then someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one, when all evidence suggested I was a bad bet." He looked at Ray. "Sometimes talent needs a platform, not judgment. Tonight I want to give Ray that platform." Ray stared at George, uncomprehending. "I'd like to invite Ray Wilson to open for me at my next 5 Texas shows," George announced. "And I want him to record a song for my upcoming album." The crowd erupted again, this time with a mixture of cheers and confused murmurs. Ray's knees nearly buckled. Tommy appeared from the wings, grabbing his elbow to steady him. George raised his hand, silencing the audience once more. "There's something else." His tone shifted, taking on an edge that was unusual for the typically gentlemanly performer. "I understand there's a music producer in the house tonight, a Mr. Derek Chambers." A spotlight suddenly swung through the crowd, eventually finding Derek in his 10th row seat. The producer froze like a deer in headlights, as all heads turned in his direction. "I heard what you said to Ray outside the venue," George continued, his voice carrying an unusual steel, "about how he was destroying a classic, about how people should take notes on how not to sing." Derek's face drained of color as he realized he was being called out in front of the entire arena. Next to him, his companions edged away, creating visible distance. "I've been in this business a long time, Mr. Chambers," George said. "Long enough to know that sometimes the best music comes from the most unexpected places. Perhaps we could all learn something about not judging a book by its cover or a voice by its clothes." 15,000 pairs of eyes bored into Derek, who could do nothing but offer a small nod of acknowledgement, his humiliation complete. George ended the unprecedented evening with a final gesture to Ray. "Let's hear it one more time for Ray. Wilson, folks. Remember his name? You'll be hearing it again soon." Backstage after the show, Ray sat in George Strait's dressing room, still clutching the Takamine guitar, afraid that if he set it down, he might wake up from this dream and find himself back under the Congress Avenue Bridge. "Drink this," Tommy said, handing Ray a cup of hot coffee. "You look like you need it." Ray accepted the cup gratefully. "Did that really just happen? Or am I hallucinating?" Tommy laughed. "It happened. And from the buzz already hitting social media, it's going viral as we speak." The door opened and George Strait walked in, having changed from his stage clothes into jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Even in casual clothes, he carried himself with the unmistakable aura of country royalty. "How are you holding up?" George asked Ray. "I don't know how to thank you," Ray replied, his voice catching. "What you did out there, nobody's believed in me like that in years." George sat down across from him. "Talent deserves recognition, regardless of circumstances. But Ray, I need to ask you something important, and I need an honest answer." Ray tensed, waiting. "Are you serious about staying sober? Because what I'm offering, the opening slots, the recording, it comes with one condition. You have to get clean and stay clean. I'll help with that part, but the commitment has to come from you." Ray looked down at the guitar in his lap, running his fingers over its polished surface. The question hung heavy in the air between them. 3 weeks ago," Ray began slowly, "I woke up behind a dumpster with no idea how I got there. Had my wallet stolen, along with my mother's wedding ring, the last thing I had of hers. That was my rock bottom." He looked up, meeting George's eyes. "I haven't had a drop since. I can't promise I won't struggle, but I can promise I'll fight every day to stay sober." George held Ray's gaze for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw there. "Tommy will get you set up with a hotel tonight. Tomorrow, we start figuring out the details. You'll need clothes, a place to stay, and we'll get you into a support program." Ray swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this for me?" George's expression softened slightly. 30 years ago, I made a promise that if I ever made it, I'd pay it forward. Tonight's just me keeping that promise." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Get some rest, Ray. Tomorrow's the first day of your new life." As Ray left with Tommy, George remained behind, making a phone call. "It's done," he said to the person on the other end. "You were right about him." Across town, in the upscale Driscoll Hotel bar, Derek Chambers nursed a whiskey, his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Video clips of George STRAIT calling him out were already circulating, garnering thousands of comments, most of them unfavorable to Derek. 15 years of building his reputation in the Austin music scene, and in one night, he had become the villain in a viral story of redemption. "Another," he motioned to the bartender, pushing his empty glass forward. "Tough night?" asked a voice beside him. Derek turned to find a woman in her early 40s taking the seat next to him. She had intelligent eyes and carried herself with the confident air of someone comfortable in any room. "You could say that," Derek replied, not inviting further conversation. "Sarah Wilson," she introduced herself, extending her hand. Derek shook it automatically. "Derek Chambers, though after tonight you might know me as that asshole producer." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "I saw what happened at the concert," Derek winced. "Were you there, or have you just seen the 50 different angles of my public shaming that are currently circulating online?" "I was there," she confirmed. "Front row, actually. Press pass." "Fantastic," Derek muttered. "A journalist. Are you here to get a quote from the villain of the piece?" Sarah studied him for a moment. "Actually, I'm here because Ray Wilson is my ex-husband." Derek choked on his whiskey. "What?" "We separated 12 years ago. His drinking was tearing our family apart." She sighed. "I've followed his downward spiral from a distance. Couldn't bear to watch up close, especially with our daughter to raise." Derek set down his glass, suddenly very sober. "Why are you telling me this? Why are you even talking to me?" "Because tomorrow morning, my phone will start ringing with calls from every music publication wanting the Ray Wilson story, and I'm trying to decide what kind of story I want to tell." "And what do I have to do with that decision?" Derek asked cautiously. Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. "That depends on whether you're actually the person you appeared to be tonight, or if there's more to you than one bad moment captured on camera." Derek stared into his whiskey glass. I've been in this business 25 years, Ms. Wilson. I've discovered real talent and helped launch careers. I'm not in the habit of mocking homeless people, he sighed. But today, I don't know. I saw him there, looking like he did, playing that guitar with the missing string, and something just snapped. Maybe it was seeing someone with obvious talent, who'd thrown it all away. Sarah nodded slowly. He had so much potential. We met when he was the rising star of the Austin scene. Everyone said he'd be the next big thing. What happened? Derek asked. Success started coming, and so did the drinking. First, it was just to calm his nerves before shows. Then it was to celebrate good performances. Then it was to dull the pain of bad ones. Sarah's voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed old pain. Eventually, it was just to get through the day. The bartender set Derek's fresh whiskey before him. He stared at it for a long moment, then pushed it away, untouched. Our daughter Emma hasn't seen her father since she was 8, Sarah continued. She's 20 now, studying music at Berkeley. Inherited his talent without the demons, thankfully. Derek rubbed his face tiredly. Why are you really here, Ms. Wilson? What do you want from me? Sarah took a business card from her purse and placed it on the bar. Ray's going to need more than just George Strait's goodwill to stay on track. He'll need people in the industry who understand both music and recovery. She stood up. Think about what kind of story you want to be part of going forward, Mr. Chambers. Redemption isn't just for down-and-out musicians. As Sarah walked away, Derek picked up her card. She was a music journalist for Rolling Stone, one of the most respected in the business. He slipped the card into his pocket, left money for his drinks, and headed out into the Austin night, his mind racing with possibilities he hadn't considered when the evening began. Meanwhile, Ray Wilson lay awake in a hotel bed, the first real bed he'd slept in for nearly 3 years. The softness of the mattress felt strange after countless nights on concrete and park benches. On the nightstand beside him sat the Takamine guitar George Strait had given him, its presence a tangible reminder that the night's events had actually happened. Ray reached for his phone, a prepaid model with a cracked screen that he kept charged for emergencies, and found it flooded with messages from people who'd long since written him off. News traveled fast in the music world. Scrolling through the notifications, one name made his heart stop. Sarah Wilson. The message was simple. Emma saw the video. She wants to talk. When you're ready. Ray set the phone down, overcome with emotion. His daughter wanted to talk. After 12 years of silence, after all the birthdays and holidays he'd missed, after all the pain he'd caused, she wanted to talk. He got up and moved to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline. Somewhere out there was the bridge he'd slept under just last night. Somewhere out there was his daughter, perhaps watching the video of him singing with George Strait. Somewhere out there was a future he'd stopped believing was possible. Ray picked up the Takamine guitar, careful not to disturb anyone in neighboring rooms, and began softly picking out a melody that had been forming in his head since he'd stepped off the stage. A song about second chances, about redemption, about the long road back from nowhere. As the first verse took shape, Ray Wilson smiled for what felt like the first time in years. Morning arrived with blinding clarity through unfamiliar curtains. Ray woke disoriented, momentarily panicked by the soft mattress beneath him and the clean sheets against his skin. It took several seconds for the previous night's events to come rushing back. The concert, the stage, George Strait, the crowd's reaction. Sitting up quickly, he spotted the Takamine guitar leaning against the wall, confirming that it hadn't been some elaborate dream conjured by a desperate mind. A knock at the door startled him. Cautiously, Ray padded across the plush carpet and peered through the peephole. "Morning, sunshine," Tommy Foley called through the door. "Decent day out here, got coffee and breakfast." And Ray opened the door to find George Strait's tour manager balancing a cardboard tray with 2 large cups of coffee and a bag from a local bakery. Tommy looked fresh and organized despite the late night, while Ray knew he looked like exactly what he was, a homeless man who'd somehow landed in a 4-star hotel. "Hope you slept well," Tommy said, setting the breakfast on the small table by the window. "You've got quite a day ahead." Ray ran a hand through his tangled hair. "What exactly happens now? Last night feels like some kind of fever dream." Tommy grinned, sliding a coffee toward Ray. "3 cream, 2 sugar. Figured you for a sweet coffee guy." He opened the bakery bag, releasing the aroma of fresh pastries. "What happens now is we get to work." George meant what he said about those opening slots. "First one's in Houston 3 days from now." Ray nearly choked on his coffee. 3 days. I don't have songs ready. I don't have clothes. I don't have—" "Slow down," Tommy interrupted. "George has a team for this. You'll meet with them after breakfast. They'll get you outfitted, help select your set list, arrange rehearsal time." Ray stared into his coffee cup. "Why is he doing this? Really? I'm nobody." Tommy studied him thoughtfully. "You know, I've worked with George for 15 years and I still can't always tell you what he's thinking. But I know this. He doesn't do things for show. If he put you on that stage, it's because he heard something genuine." Before Ray could respond, Tommy's phone buzzed. He checked the message and stood up. "Car will be here in 30 minutes to take you to meet the team. There's clothes in the closet. Nothing fancy, just basics in your size. Shower's all yours." He headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Ray, your video from last night already has 2 million views." Left alone, Ray moved to the closet and found clean jeans, t-shirts, button-downs, socks, underwear, all new, all in his size. In the bathroom, travel-sized toiletries lined the counter. Someone had thought of everything. He caught his reflection in the mirror, the unkempt beard, the hollow cheeks, the haunted eyes. He barely recognized himself. "Who are you now?" he whispered to his reflection. 90 minutes later, Ray sat in a conference room at the Record. Label's Austin office, surrounded by marketing executives, stylists, and production staff, all discussing him as though he were a product being readied for market. "We're thinking authentic, but cleaned up," said a stylish woman who had introduced herself as the image consultant. "Keep the rugged look, but refined. Nothing too polished. His authenticity is the selling point." Ray shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He'd been measured, photographed, and assessed more in the past hour than in his entire life. Everyone was professional, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being a charity case, the homeless project George STRAIT had rescued. The door opened and all chatter ceased as George STRAIT himself walked in, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, his signature cowboy hat in hand. Everyone stood respectfully, including Ray, who suddenly felt even more out of place. "Morning, everyone," George nodded, taking a seat at the head of the table. "How are we doing, Ray?" "Bit overwhelmed, to be honest, sir," Ray admitted. George looked around the table at his assembled team. "Could I have the room with Ray for a few minutes?" The staff filed out efficiently, leaving Ray alone with the country legend. "This is a lot," George acknowledged once the door closed. "And it's about to be more. Press wants interviews, social media is blowing up, and people who wouldn't give you the time of day yesterday will be calling themselves your oldest friends by tonight." Ray nodded slowly. "I don't know how to navigate any of that. That's what the team is for. They'll run interference, manage the schedule, handle the logistics." George leaned forward. "But there's something more important we need to discuss. I made some calls this morning. There's a spot for you at the Crossroads Recovery Center starting tomorrow. 6-week program, best in Texas for musicians." Ray felt his stomach drop. 6 weeks. "But the shows will wait," George finished firmly. "I've been in this business long enough to know how it destroys people. The opening slots will be there when you're ready. First, you get healthy." Ray stared at his hands. "What if I fail?" George's expression remained steady. "Then you get back. Up and try again. Recovery isn't a straight line, Ray. But here's the deal. I'm investing in you, not just as a musician, but as a person. All I ask is that you invest in yourself with the same commitment. The sincerity in Strait's voice left no room for argument. Ray nodded, a mixture of gratitude and fear washing over him. There's something else, George continued, sliding an envelope across the table. Phone number for Sarah Wilson. She reached out through my management this morning. Ray's hand trembled as he took the envelope. My ex-wife. She mentioned a daughter. Emma, I believe. Ray's throat tightened. She was 8 last time I saw her. She's 20 now. The weight of those lost years pressed down on him like a physical force. Might be time to start rebuilding those bridges, George suggested gently. When you're ready. After the meeting concluded, Ray was escorted to a nearby studio where he would record demos of potential songs for his opening sets. The studio was modest but well-equipped, a professional space where Austin musicians crafted their work, away from the spotlight. As Ray set up in the booth, adjusting the microphone and settling with the takamine, the studio door opened. Tommy's voice carried through the room. This is a last-minute addition, George asked personally. Ray looked up to see Derek Chambers following Tommy into the studio. The producer stopped short upon seeing Ray, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and professional detachment. Mr. Wilson, Derek acknowledged with a short nod. Tommy looked between the two men, sensing the tension. I'll be right outside if you need anything, he said, leaving them alone. An uncomfortable silence filled the studio. Derek was the first to break it, clearing his throat as he moved to the mixing board. I deserve whatever you want to say to me, Derek began, not making eye contact as he adjusted settings on the console. What I did was unprofessional and cruel. Ray watched him carefully. Why are you here? Derek looked up, meeting Ray's eyes for the first time. Because George. STRAIT called me personally at 6 this morning and said, you broke it, you fix it. Then he hung up. Despite everything, Ray found himself laughing, a genuine laugh that felt foreign after so long. That sounds like him, based on my limited experience. A ghost of a smile crossed Derek's face. He's not wrong. I've been in this business 25 years. I should know better than to judge someone based on appearances. He paused. Especially someone with your level of talent. Ray raised an eyebrow. Now you're just trying to flatter your way out of trouble. No flattery, Derek said seriously. What you did on that stage last night, that was real. The kind of real that's becoming increasingly rare in this industry. He hesitated. I also spoke with your ex-wife last night. Ray stiffened. Sarah? Derek nodded. She found me at the Driscoll after the show. Quite a remarkable woman. Always was, Ray agreed quietly. She helped me understand some context, Derek continued, about your journey. Ray's jaw tightened. I don't need pity, especially from you. Good, because I'm not offering any, Derek replied evenly. What I'm offering is my expertise. I've produced 14 gold records and 6 Grammy-nominated albums. And right now, my reputation in this town is about as valuable as used guitar strings, thanks to last night. Ray studied the producer thoughtfully. So this is about saving your career? Partially, Derek admitted with unexpected honesty. But it's also about recognizing when I've been proven wrong. You have something special, Ray. Something that can't be manufactured or auto-tuned into existence. Ray considered this. And George STRAIT asked you specifically to produce my demos. Derek nodded. His exact words were, make him sound like himself, only better. For the next 3 hours, Ray and Derek worked together in a cautious but increasingly productive collaboration. Derek's expertise was undeniable. He knew exactly how to capture Ray's raw sound while enhancing it subtly. By mid-afternoon, they had rough cuts of 5 songs, 3 covers and 2 originals that Ray had been working on during his time on the streets. During a break, Ray stepped outside to get some air, the spring Texas sun warm on his face. He pulled out his phone and stared at Sarah's number, which he'd programmed in that morning. His finger hovered over the call button several times before he finally put the phone away. Not yet. He needed more solid ground beneath his feet before attempting that particular bridge. When he returned to the studio, Derek was listening to their recordings, making notes. "These are good," Derek said without looking up. "The covers are solid, but those originals, they're something special, Ray. Especially the one about second chances." Ray slid back onto his stool. "Wrote most of that last night in the hotel room." Derek turned to face him fully. "I heard about your rehab tomorrow. 6 weeks at Crossroads." Ray tensed. "News travels fast. George cleared your schedule with me, said your health comes first." Derek hesitated. "I've been there, you know. Not homeless, but rock bottom. 10 years sober now." Ray looked at him with new understanding. "That why you reacted so strongly to me?" Derek considered this. "Maybe. Sometimes the hardest thing to face is someone who reminds you of your own worst moments." He straightened in his chair. "But that's my issue, not yours." They continued working until evening, with Derek offering guidance that was firm but respectful, treating Ray as a fellow professional rather than a charity case. By the time they finished, both men were exhausted but satisfied with what they'd accomplished. As Ray packed up the Takamine, Derek approached with an outstretched hand. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Derek said. "Just a chance to make things right professionally." Ray looked at the offered hand, thinking of all that had changed in 24 hours. Yesterday, he'd been invisible to people like Derek Chambers. Today, they were shaking hands as colleagues. "Second chances seem to be going around," Ray said, accepting the handshake. That night, back in his hotel room, Ray sat on the edge of the bed staring at his phone. The studio session had given him a boost of confidence, but the thought of calling Sarah, of possibly speaking to Emma, terrified him more than facing 15,000 people at the Frank Irwin Center. Just as he was about to set the phone, aside again, it buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Sarah. "Heard you're starting at Crossroads tomorrow. Proud of you for taking that step. Emma says good luck." Ray's vision blurred with tears. With trembling fingers, he typed back, "Thank you, both of you. I'm going to get this right." The reply came almost immediately. "One day at a time. That's all anyone can do." Ray slept little that night, his mind racing with thoughts of rehabilitation, opening for George STRAIT, reconnecting with his daughter, and somehow proving worthy of this impossible second chance. Decades of bad decisions and regret couldn't be undone in a night, but for the first time in years, Ray Wilson fell asleep with something that had long been absent from his life: hope. The Crossroads Recovery Center sat on 20 acres of peaceful Texas Hill country outside Austin. As Tommy's car approached the facility the next morning, Ray stared out the window at the modern, low-slung buildings surrounded by live oak trees and carefully maintained gardens. "This doesn't look like a rehab," Ray remarked. Tommy kept his eyes on the road. "It's not the kind you're thinking of. It's specifically for musicians and artists. They understand the unique pressures of the industry." Ray clutched his small bag of new belongings. "George STRAIT is paying for this, isn't he? This place must cost a fortune." "Don't worry about that," Tommy advised, pulling up to the main entrance. "Just focus on getting healthy." As they walked toward the reception area, Ray spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance, Derek Chambers, holding a guitar case. "What are you doing here?" Ray asked as they approached. Derek handed him the case. "Brought you something for your stay. They allow instruments here. Music therapy is part of the program." Ray opened the case to find his old 5-string guitar, expertly repaired. All 6 strings were intact, the body cleaned and polished, but it was unmistakably his, the companion that had seen him through his darkest days. "How did you—" "Tommy told me where you usually stayed. I found it under the bridge this morning," Derek explained. "Had my tech work on it. Thought you might want something familiar while you're here." Ray ran his fingers over the worn wood, touched beyond words by the gesture. "Good luck in there, Ray," Derek said, turning to leave. "I'll see you in 6 weeks. We've got work to do." As Derek walked away, Ray called after him, "Why did you really come here today?" Derek paused, looking back. "Because 20 years ago, someone did the same for me when I checked in. Sometimes the hardest step is the first. Run through those doors." With that, Derek Chambers walked to his car and drove away, leaving Ray standing at the threshold of his new beginning. "Ready?" Tommy asked quietly. Ray took a deep breath, clutching his repaired guitar. "As I'll ever be." Together they walked through the doors of Crossroads Recovery Center, the first step in Ray Wilson's long journey back from nowhere. The first week at Crossroads nearly broke Ray. His body revolted against sobriety with tremors, insomnia, and mood swings that left him alternating between rage and despair. The comfortable surroundings of the recovery center felt like a cruel joke. He didn't deserve this place, with its soothing fountains and compassionate staff, not after everything he'd destroyed. On his 3rd night, during the worst of the physical withdrawal, Ray's counselor, Mark, found him sitting on the floor of his room, crying, the repaired guitar untouched beside him. "Tell me why you're here, Ray," Mark said, sitting cross-legged on the floor across from him. "Because George STRAIT is paying for it," Ray answered bitterly. Mark nodded, unfazed by the hostility. "That's how you got here. I'm asking why you stayed. You could have walked out that first day." Ray stared at his trembling hands. "Because I've got one last chance to see my daughter again, to not die under a bridge." "That's a start," Mark said. "Now pick up that guitar." "I can't play right now," Ray protested. "My hands won't stop shaking." "I didn't ask you to play. I asked you to pick it up." Reluctantly, Ray pulled the instrument onto his lap, feeling its familiar weight. "That guitar survived everything you put it through," Mark observed. "All those years on the streets, all those nights in the rain, all those times you probably thought about selling it for a drink but didn't. Why?" Ray's fingers traced the worn wood grain. "Because it was the only thing that still made me feel human." Mark nodded. "That's what we're doing here, Ray, rebuilding the human. The music will follow." By the end of the 2nd week, the physical symptoms had begun to subside, replaced by the harder work of facing the emotional wasteland Ray had created. Group therapy sessions forced him to confront the wreckage of his past, the failed marriage, the abandoned child, the squandered talent, the friends he'd disappointed until they stopped expecting anything from him. One afternoon, during a private session, Mark asked Ray about the night that had changed everything. "I'm told you were on track for a major label deal," Mark said. "What happened?" Ray stared out the window at the hill country landscape. "Showcase night at the Continental Club, March 15th, 2008. Biggest night of my career. A&R guys from 3 labels were there." He swallowed hard. "I got so drunk beforehand I could barely stand. Played the worst set of my life, forgot lyrics to my own songs. The label reps walked out halfway through. And after that, Sarah gave me an ultimatum that night. Get help or she was taking Emma and leaving." Ray's voice grew quieter. "I chose the bottle. They were gone the next morning." Mark let the silence settle before asking, "And now you've been given another chance at a career. What scares you most?" "About that," Ray turned to face his counselor, "that I'll prove George STRAIT wrong, that I'll fail again in front of everyone, that Emma will see her father crash and burn a second time." "That's honest," Mark acknowledged. "Now the more important question, what are you willing to do differently this time?" As the third week progressed, Ray began to find his footing in the daily rhythm of recovery. Mornings started with meditation and group check-ins, followed by therapy sessions and recovery education. Afternoons included physical activity, hiking the center's trails or swimming in the indoor pool, followed by music therapy sessions that Ray initially resisted but gradually came to value. It was during one of these sessions that Ray reconnected with his original love for music, separate from the ambition and self-destruction that had become entangled with it. The music therapist, Eleanor, encouraged participants to play songs that expressed emotions they were struggling to verbalize. "Play me something that isn't about pain," Eleanor challenged Ray one afternoon. Ray thought for a moment, then began playing a gentle melody he'd composed years ago when Emma was a toddler, a lullaby he would play on nights when she couldn't sleep. His fingers moved with muscle memory across the strings, finding notes he hadn't played in years, but that lived somewhere deep in his heart. When he finished, Eleanor asked, "What's that one called?" "Emma's Song," Ray replied softly. "I wrote it for my daughter." "Have you ever recorded it?" Ray shook his head. "It was just for her." Elena considered this. Maybe it still can be. At the halfway point of his stay, Ray received his first visitor. Tommy Foley arrived with updates from the outside world and a manila envelope from George Strait. "How's it going in here?" Tommy asked as they sat in the visitors' lounge. "Hardest thing I've ever done," Ray admitted. "But I'm starting to believe I might actually make it through." Tommy nodded approvingly. "George will be glad to hear it. Interest in you hasn't died down, you know. That video hit 5 million views. People are asking when they can hear more from Ray Wilson." Ray felt a flutter of both excitement and anxiety. "One day at a time, like they keep telling me here." Tommy handed over the envelope. "George wanted you to have these. Said there's no pressure, but thought you might find some inspiration." Inside were sheet music and lyrics for 2 new songs STRAIT was working on for his upcoming album, with notes suggesting Ray might want to consider recording one as a duet. "He's serious about this," Ray said, staring at the papers in disbelief. "George doesn't do things halfway," Tommy confirmed. "Oh, and Derek Chambers has been calling every few days to check on your progress. Says he's lining up session musicians for when you're ready." Ray shook his head in amazement. "A month ago, I was invisible to everyone except other homeless people. Now I've got George Strait sending me songs and Derek Chambers assembling a band for me." Tommy's expression grew more serious. "Which is exactly why you need to stay the course in here. Success can be as dangerous as failure for someone in recovery." "My counselor says the same thing," Ray acknowledged. "Says I need to figure out who I am without the alcohol and without the validation of an audience." "Smart counselor," Tommy observed. As Tommy was leaving, he handed Ray a small package. "Almost forgot. This came to George's office for you." It was a simple padded envelope with Ray's name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Dad, I thought you might want to hear what I've been working on. Emma." That night, Ray sat in the center's computer lab, with headphones on, heart pounding as he inserted the drive. The screen showed a single audio file labeled Thesis Project Emma Wilson. He clicked play, and his daughter's voice filled his ears, a voice he hadn't heard since she was a child, now mature and confident. "This is my final project for music composition at Berkeley, inspired by early Austin Americana and Gulf Coast blues." What followed was a sophisticated composition that blended acoustic guitar with subtle electronic elements and haunting vocals. Ray recognized his own influences in her style, but Emma had created something uniquely hers, something both nostalgic and forward-looking. Halfway through the piece, Ray realized she had incorporated melodic elements of the lullaby he'd written. For her, transformed into a complex musical theme that served as the composition's emotional core. Tears streamed down his face as he listened to his daughter's musical evolution. the talent that had flourished despite his absence, or perhaps in defiance of it. When the recording ended, Ray sat motionless for several minutes. Then he opened the center's basic recording software and began to create a response, a musical conversation with the daughter he hadn't spoken to in 12 years. He played Emma's lullaby, then developed it further, adding elements that complemented what she'd created, building a bridge between her composition and his original. At the end, he added a simple spoken message. "It's beautiful, Emma. You've become the musician I always hoped to be." The halfway point of Ray's stay marked a turning point. Something shifted in him as he sent that response to Emma. A realization that recovery wasn't just about what he might gain, but about what he could give back. He attacked the remaining weeks of the program with renewed purpose, actively participating in group sessions and mentoring newer arrivals. Ray began writing again with a productivity he hadn't experienced in years. The songs were different now, less self-pitying, more reflective, with an authenticity born from having seen both sides of fortune. During his 5th week at Crossroads, Ray received another visitor, one he hadn't expected. Sarah Wilson was waiting in the visitors' lounge, looking both familiar and strange. 12 years had added subtle lines around her eyes and silver threads to her dark hair, but she carried herself with the same quiet confidence Ray remembered. "Sarah," he said, stopping a few feet away, suddenly unsure of protocol. Did one hug an ex-wife after 12 years of absence, shake hands, keep distance? She solved the dilemma by stepping forward and giving him a brief, somewhat awkward hug. "You look good, Ray," she said as they sat down. "Healthy." "Getting there," he replied, studying her face. "Thank you for coming, and for letting Emma reach out." Sarah nodded. "She made that decision herself. I've never kept her from contacting you, Ray. That was your department." The gentle accusation stung, but Ray accepted it as truth. "I know. I couldn't face her. Face either of you, like I was. And now?" Ray considered his answer carefully. "Now I'm finding out who I am without the alcohol. Trying to become someone worth knowing again." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Emma listened to what you sent. It meant a lot to her." "She's incredibly talented," Ray said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Yes, she is." Sarah paused. "She's coming to Austin when the semester ends next month. She'd like to see you if you're open to that." Ray felt his throat tighten. "Of course, yes, whenever she wants." Sarah studied him with a journalist's observant gaze. "This George Strait thing, is it real or just a momentary feel-good story that'll fade away?" "It's real," Ray confirmed. "At least the opportunity is. What I do with it is up to me." "And what will you do with it?" Ray met her eyes directly. "Take it one day at a time. Build something sustainable. Try not to confuse attention with accomplishment." Sarah nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "You've changed. There's something different in your eyes." 39 days sober, Ray said, doesn't erase 12 years of mistakes, but it's a start. As Sarah was leaving, she turned back with one last thought. "You know, Ray, for years, I was so angry at you for throwing everything away. Your career, our marriage, your relationship with Emma." She looked at him thoughtfully. "But maybe you needed to lose it all to find your way back. Maybe this is the path you had to take." Ray considered this. "I wouldn't wish my path on anyone, but I'm starting to believe it might lead somewhere worth going." On Ray's final day at Crossroads, he participated in the traditional departure ceremony. Residents and staff gathered in the center's main hall, where departing members shared reflections on their stay and intentions for the future. When it was Ray's turn, he brought his guitar to the front of the room. "When I came here, I didn't believe I deserved another chance, he began. I'd convinced myself that I was exactly where I belonged, invisible, forgotten under that bridge. He looked around at the faces that had become familiar over 6 weeks. What I found here wasn't just sobriety. It was the possibility that my story wasn't finished yet. He positioned his guitar and began to play. Not one of his own compositions, but George Strait's Troubadour. As he sang about a man looking back on his life's journey, the parallels to his own situation weren't lost on anyone present. When he finished, Mark stepped forward to present Ray with his 6-week sobriety chip. Recovery isn't a destination, Ray. It's a practice. What will you do tomorrow to continue what you started here? Ray accepted the chip, feeling its weight in his palm. I'll remember that the music isn't the most important thing I have to offer, and I'll call my sponsor before I call anyone else in the industry. As he walked out of Crossroads that afternoon, Tommy was waiting by the car, along with Derek Chambers. "Welcome back," Tommy said, taking Ray's bag. Derek extended his hand. "Ready to make some music?" Ray looked back at the facility that had become his home for 6 transformative weeks, then turned toward Austin's skyline in the distance. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, stepping into his new life one day at a time. The Austin recording studio hummed with activity as Ray sat in the control room, listening to playback of his latest session. 6 months had passed since he left Crossroads. 6 months of sobriety, of rebuilding bridges, of rediscovering himself within the unfamiliar context of opportunity. "What do you think?" Derek Chambers asked, swiveling his chair to face Ray. Ray listened intently as the chorus swelled. The production was clean, but not over-polished, maintaining the authentic roughness that had captivated audiences during his performance with George Strait. His voice, once damaged by years of alcohol abuse and sleeping rough, had regained much of its former power while retaining the emotional texture that made it distinctive. "It's good," Ray said finally. "Better than anything I've recorded before." Derek nodded in agreement. "We've got 10 solid tracks. The duet with George is going to be the single, obviously, but there's 3 or 4 others that could follow it." The transformation of Ray's relationship with Derek remained one of the most unexpected developments of his journey. What had begun as mutual animosity had evolved into a productive, creative partnership, with Derek serving as both producer and unofficial sobriety ally. "Have you decided on the album title?" Derek asked. Ray had been wrestling with this question for weeks. "Under the Bridge," he said finally. Derek considered it. "Embracing where you came from. I like it. It's where I found rock bottom, but also where I was found," Ray explained. "Seems fitting." As if on cue, the studio door opened and George Strait entered, removing his signature cowboy hat as he stepped inside. Despite months of working together, Ray still felt a surge of disbelief whenever the country legend appeared. "How's it sounding?" George asked, settling into a chair beside them. Derek played back their duet, a reflective ballad called Second Chances that George had co-written specifically for their collaboration. The song had been carefully crafted to showcase both George's classic country Polish and Ray's more weathered vocal approach. As the final notes faded, George nodded approvingly. "That's the one. That's going to put you back on the map, Ray." "Thanks to you," Ray said, the gratitude evident in his voice. George shook his head. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and did the work." The work had been substantial. Beyond the music itself, Ray had undertaken the challenging process of rebuilding his public identity. A series of carefully managed interviews had introduced his story to the world, not as a bid for sympathy, but as a testament to human resilience. He attended AA meetings religiously, worked with his sponsor, and had become a cautious advocate for music industry mental health initiatives. "The label wants to release the single next month," George continued. "They're thinking a special performance at ACL Live would be the perfect launch event." Ray's stomach tightened at the thought. Despite having performed at several smaller venues during his recovery, the prospect of headlining Austin's premier music venue still triggered anxiety. George seemed to read his thoughts. "You'll be ready, and I'll be there." After George departed, Derek remained behind to finalize some production details. The two men had fallen into an easy working relationship that would have seemed impossible the night they first met outside the Moody Theatre. "You nervous about seeing Emma tomorrow?" Derek asked as they were wrapping up. Ray nodded. He'd had several video calls with his daughter over the months, gradually rebuilding their relationship, but tomorrow would be their first in-person meeting in over a decade. "Terrified," he admitted. "What do you say to someone you abandoned for 12 years? "You listen more than you talk," Derek suggested. "That's what I did when my own kids finally agreed to see me again after my divorce." This was new information. "I didn't know you had children," Ray said. Derek's expression softened. "2 daughters. They're in college now. There were years when they wanted nothing to do with me. I was too focused on my career, missed too many important moments." He sighed. "Your story made me take a hard look at my own life, Ray. Watching you rebuild gave me the courage to try fixing things with them." And the revelation created a new dimension in Ray's understanding of the producer. "How'd that work out?" "Still a work in progress," Derek said with a small smile, "but better than I deserve." As Ray left the studio that evening, he found himself walking through downtown Austin with new eyes. The streets that had once been his home now felt like a different city altogether. He passed the Congress Avenue Bridge, the place where George STRAIT had found him, and paused to look out over the water. A young street musician was playing nearby, her guitar case open for tips. Ray dropped a $20 bill into the case. "You've got something special there," he told her. "Keep at it." She looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes. "You're Ray Wilson. I saw the video of you with George STRAIT." Ray nodded, still unused to being recognized. "Is it true," she asked, "that you were homeless before that night?" "For almost 3 years," Ray confirmed. She gestured to the bridge. "I've been sleeping in my car for the past month, trying to make enough playing gigs to afford rent." Ray hesitated only briefly before taking out his phone. "There's an open mic night at the Saxon pub tomorrow. The booker's a friend of mine now. Can I give him your name?" The girl's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Talent deserves recognition," Ray said, echoing George's words from that life-changing night. "But take care of yourself first. The music will always be there when you're ready." The following morning, Ray waited at Mozart's Coffee Roasters on Lake Austin, a cup of black coffee growing cold before him as he watched the entrance. When Emma finally appeared, he almost didn't recognize her. The 8-year-old girl in his memory had been replaced by a poised young woman of 20, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob, her mother's intelligent eyes taking in everything around her. Ray stood as she approached, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She stopped a few feet away, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce embrace. "Dad," she said, and the simple word nearly broke him. When they separated, both were wiping away tears. They sat across from each other, the weight of 12 lost years hanging between them. "I like what you did with my composition," Emma said. "Finally." "The counter-melody in the bridge was brilliant," Ray smiled. "I learned from the best. Your arrangement was incredible." "Berkeley's a good school," she said with a small shrug. "It's not the school, it's the talent." Ray hesitated. "You have what I never did, discipline to match your creativity." Emma's expression grew more serious. "Mom told me everything, you know, about how big you were getting before it fell apart." Ray nodded, accepting the opening to the conversation they needed to have. I've prepared a lot of speeches for this moment. Explanations, apologies, but none of them seem adequate. Then don't give me a speech, Emma said. Just tell me the truth. Were there really no times in 12 years when you could have reached out, when you could have been my father? The directness of the question cut through Ray's defenses. There were many times when I should have, when I wanted to. He met her gaze. But I couldn't bear for you to see what I'd become. Every year that passed made it harder to bridge the gap. I used to hate you, Emma said quietly. Then I felt nothing, which was worse somehow. I told myself you didn't matter to me anymore. I wouldn't blame you if you still felt that way. Emma considered this. When I saw that video, you on stage with George Strait, I felt something crack open inside me. Not just because you were suddenly visible again, but because I recognized something in your voice, something I'd been trying to capture in my own music, without realizing where it came from. Ray listened, barely breathing. That's when I understood that no matter how much distance we had between us, part of you was always in me, in the way I approach music, in the way I hear melodies. She looked down at her hands. I'm not saying I'm ready to forget everything or that we can just pick up like nothing happened, but I'm willing to try building something new. That's more than I have any right to ask for, Ray said. I wasted so many years, Emma. I can't get those back for either of us, but if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your future. They spent 3 hours at the coffee shop talking about music theory, about Emma's studies, about her plans after graduation. Ray listened more than he spoke, soaking in the details of the life he'd missed, marveling at the extraordinary young woman his daughter had become despite his absence. As they were preparing to leave, Emma handed him a USB drive similar to the one she'd sent months earlier. It's my newest project, she explained. I was hoping maybe you'd consider collaborating on it. There's a section where I can hear your guitar style, but I can't quite get it right. Ray stared at the small device as if she'd handed him a priceless treasure. I'd be honored, he managed to say. Mom said your album's coming out soon, Emma continued. She's written a feature about your comeback for Rolling Stone. She told me, Ray said. Promised not to pull any punches. Emma smiled slightly. She never does. But she's fair. She hesitated. Would it be okay if I came to your album release? Good show. Mom mentioned it's at ACL Live next month. You'd want to come? I'd like to see my dad perform, she said simply. As they parted ways, Ray felt something shift inside him, a wound beginning to heal, a possibility opening where there had been only regret. The day of the album release show arrived with a flurry of activity. Ray's transformation from homeless, a street musician to recording artist was complete, at least outwardly. Inwardly, he still battled daily with the insecurities and cravings that threatened his recovery. He had learned to recognize the warning signs, to reach out to his sponsor, to take things moment by moment when necessary. Backstage at ACL Live, Ray peered through the curtain at the sold-out venue. Music journalists, industry executives, and fans filled the historic space. In the front,